You'd think the night shift for a security guard would be quiet, a silent, solitary watch over empty spaces where the only sounds are the hum of machinery and your own footsteps on cold floors. But for some, that silence is a lie. It's a curtain, and when it's pulled back, it reveals a nightmare they were never trained for. The deep night isolation can play tricks on your mind, sure, but sometimes what's lurking in the shadows is all too real. We're about to share 7 stories from guards who found out what truly hides in the dark after everyone else has gone home. These accounts come directly from the guards themselves, shared in online forums and communities where they can talk about the things they just can't explain. While the specific details are often unverified, they're personal stories. The folklore of the lonely night, watch the terror felt by those who were there, is undeniable. Before we dive in, if you love stories from the dark side of the 9 to 5, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more. Now, turn down the lights and listen close. Story 1, The Laughter in the Tower. Our first story comes from a guard named Ken, who landed what he thought was a dream job patrolling a gleaming 39-story skyscraper in Singapore. The building was modern, clean, and after 10 p.m., completely deserted. His job was simple: walk the floors, check the locks, and report anything unusual. For the first few weeks, the only thing unusual was the deep, profound silence. The routine was almost hypnotic. Clock in, grab the keys, and start the long walk up through the empty offices. Then one night, around 1 a.m., Ken was in the main ground floor foyer. It was a massive space of marble and glass, designed to impress. But at night, it was an echo chamber. As he did a final check on the front doors, he heard it, a soft, giggling sound. Heh. It sounded like a young woman coming from the far end of the foyer near the elevators. Ken froze, listening. The sound was gone as quickly as it came. He shook it off. The wind, maybe, or a weird echo from outside. He continued his patrol. He reached the security desk, made a note in the log, and was about to sit down when he heard it again, but closer this time. Heh. There was no mistaking it. It sounded playful, almost like a tease. But it was also impossible. He was the only person in the building. Every door was locked and monitored. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He stood up, his heart starting to pound. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice sounding tiny in the huge lobby. The only answer was a deep, listening silence. Ken grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp cone through the dark. He swept it across the foyer and down the dark corridors. Nothing. He was starting to feel like an idiot, his mind playing tricks on him. That's when he heard it for the third time, right behind him, as if someone was whispering directly into his ear. Heh. He screamed, a jolt of pure fear, sending him scrambling. He didn't look back. He burst through a side door and into the cool night air, his lungs burning. His hands were shaking so badly, it took him 3 tries to light a cigarette. He smoked it down to the filter, his eyes glued to the glass walls of the tower, half expecting to see a face looking back at him. When the senior guard arrived an hour later, he found Ken still outside, pale. Ken told him what happened, fully expecting to be laughed at. Instead, the older man just nodded. He explained that what Ken heard was a known thing in the tower. The veteran guards all had stories. Local lore claimed the skyscraper was built on old cemetery grounds, and the spirits left behind were mostly harmless, even playful. New hires were their favorite. The old guard told Ken the trick was to be firm. Some guards would even yell insults back into the darkness, and the activity would stop. Ken never got used to the laughter. He worked there for another 6 months, and on the quietest nights, he would still hear it echoing from the empty corners. He never knew if it was a ghost or just his own frayed nerves, but he knew he was never really alone. A playful ghost in a skyscraper is one thing, but our next guard found something much, much colder waiting in the shadows of a grimy warehouse. Story 2. The Rider in the Warehouse. This story is from a man named Dave, who worked 12-hour shifts as the lone guard at a huge industrial warehouse. The job was monotony itself. The warehouse was a maze of steel shelving and concrete, filled with scrap metal, old machinery, and forgotten inventory. Dave's only company was a crackling radio and the scuttling of rats. His nights were measured in footsteps. He'd walk the perimeter, check the bay doors, and then do a long, slow circuit inside. It was during one of these interior patrols, deep into a sweltering summer night, that his routine was shattered. It was around 3 a.m., the dead point of the shift, when the mind is at its most vulnerable. He was in the far section of the warehouse where old equipment was left to rust, the only light casting long, twisted shadows. He heard it before he saw it. A faint, rhythmic noise cutting through the low hum of the building. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was high-pitched and grating, like old, unoiled wheels, turning slowly. Dave stopped, listening. It was steady, repetitive. It wasn't a rat, and it wasn't the building settling. It sounded mechanical. He unclipped his flashlight and followed the noise. Moving cautiously between towers of scrap, the squeaking grew louder. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was coming from a small, open area between piles of rusted beams. He peered around the edge of a shelf, and his blood ran cold. In the center of the clearing, under the sickly yellow glow of a single lamp, a small child was riding a tricycle in slow, deliberate circles. The child was pale, wearing a simple, old-fashioned dress. Dave couldn't make out a face, just a small figure, methodically pedaling. The tricycle was tiny and rusted, its wheels grinding out that awful squeaking sound with every rotation. Dave just stood there, frozen. Every logical part of his brain was screaming. It was 3 a.m. in a locked warehouse, miles from many homes. No child could be here. He watched, horrified, as the small figure completed another circle, and then another. It never looked at him. It just kept riding, the squeaking echoing in the massive silent space. This wasn't playful. It was a chilling, silent loop that felt profoundly wrong. He slowly backed away, never taking his eyes off the figure. He didn't run or scream. He just retreated to a small security office at the front of the warehouse and locked the door. He spent the rest of his shift staring into the darkness, his heart hammering. The squeaking had stopped. When his relief arrived at 7 a.m., Dave said he was quitting. He tried to explain what he saw, but the words sounded insane. The other guard just gave him a tired look. He'd heard stories. The night shift did strange things to people. Dave never went back, but he says the image is burned into his memory. The pale child, the rusted tricycle, and the endless, squeaking circles. It's a story quietly passed around online forums for guards who work the so-called night rider, shift, a piece of folklore for those who watch over the world's forgotten places. But not every encounter is a mystery. Sometimes it feels like a message, and a terrifying one at that. Our third story comes from the isolated wetlands of the American South, where a guard came face to face with the victim of a local tragedy. Story 3. The Headless Woman at the Wetlands Campground. For guards, in remote, natural places, the fear isn't always what's in the building, but what's hiding in the landscape itself. This account comes from a former park ranger working security at a sprawling campground deep in the southern wetlands. The area was beautiful by day, but after dark, it transformed. The dense cypress trees and hanging moss just swallowed the light, and the air got thick with the sounds of the swamp. His job was to patrol the vast, dark grounds for trespassers and poachers. One night, he got a call about suspected poachers near the edge of the park. He drove his truck down a muddy road, headlights cutting through a dense fog rolling in off the water. He found an abandoned campfire, but the poachers were long gone. As he headed back, he started to get that feeling of being watched. He scanned the tree line with his spotlight, seeing only the glowing eyes of raccoons. He pulled into the main parking lot, which was completely empty. He was about to get out when he saw her. Standing under a lone, flickering lamppost near the restrooms was the figure of a woman. She was crying. He could hear the sobs clearly, a sound of pure, heart-wrenching grief. His first thought was a camper in distress. He got out of his truck, calling, "Ma'am, are you okay?" As he got closer, the details became clearer, and a wave of nausea and terror hit him so hard, he nearly fell. The woman was wearing a simple dress, her hands clasped over her neck. The sobs were coming from her chest. She had no head. He stopped dead, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. The headless figure slowly turned toward him, her body convulsing with sobs. In that moment, he remembered the local stories. Years ago, a woman had been brutally murdered in this very park. Her body was found not far from this spot. Legend says she was killed by a shotgun blast at close range. The guard stood paralyzed. He felt a presence not just in front of him, but all around him, a terrifying sensation of shadowy figures watching from the edge of the woods, silent observers. He finally found his legs and scrambled back into his truck, fumbling with the keys. He threw it in reverse and sped out of there, not daring to look back. He reported it, but the incident was filed away as the ramblings of a spooked guard. But the story doesn't end there. Months later, a deputy, responding to a different call in the same area, reported hearing disembodied crying on his patrol. His body camera was running. While it didn't capture a clear figure, those who reviewed the footage claimed you could hear the distinct, sorrowful sobs and see a strange visual anomaly near that same lamppost. The area was eventually declared off-limits after dark. The guard who saw her never went back, convinced he had met the ghost of a murdered woman, still seeking help where she lost her life. Ghosts and legends are one thing, but sometimes the real horror is what people leave behind. Our next story is a grim reminder of that. Story 4, The Shadow in the Corner Office. This account is from a guard we'll call Frank, who worked the midnight shift at a massive corporate headquarters in New York City. During the day, the prestigious building was a hub of activity. At night, it was his kingdom of silence. His job was to watch the security cameras and walk the deserted floors. For months, the job was uneventful. But then came the night he calls the discovery. He was in the security office, eyes scanning the dozens of screens showing empty hallways and vacant cubicles. Just after 2 a.m., he noticed something on a camera from the 27th floor, the executive level. It was a flicker of movement, a darting shadow near the CEO's corner office. Frank zoomed in, but saw nothing. He rewound the footage. There it was, again, a dark, blurry shape that moved with unnatural speed and then just vanished. It could have been a glitch, but his gut told him otherwise. Protocol was to investigate. He grabbed his keys and took the long elevator ride up. When the doors opened, the silence was absolute. The air was cold and still. "Security," he called out, his voice swallowed by the plush carpet. No response. He began his sweep, checking each office. Everything was normal. Then he reached the corner office. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and a smell hit him instantly. A coppery, metallic scent he knew was blood. His heart leaped into his throat. He shined his light into the room and saw him. A senior executive, a man Frank had seen 100 times, was slumped over his desk. A gun was on the floor. It was a suicide. The sound he'd thought was a camera glitch had been real. Frank backed out of the room, his mind reeling, and called the police. The rest of the night was a blur of flashing lights and grim-faced officers. The building he'd seen as a peaceful sanctuary was now a tomb. The hallways no longer felt just empty. They felt threatening. He took a week off, but had to come back. A month later, he found himself once again on the 27th floor during his midnight patrol. He had to face it. He forced himself to stand before the door to the corner office, now cleaned and sealed. As he stood there, trying to conquer his fear, he saw it again out of the corner of his eye. A flicker of movement down the hall. A shadow, darting between cubicles, just like on the camera. He whipped his flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Was it his traumatized mind playing tricks, or was a part of that night's tragedy left behind, a shadow permanently imprinted on the place where it happened? He never got an answer, but for the rest of his time there, he started leaving the lights on in the 27th floor hallway. So we've had ghosts, and we've had human tragedy. But our next story, well, it doesn't fit into any category. It comes from a remote desert facility where a guard faced something straight out of a waking nightmare. Story 5, The Tall Man and the Clown. Our fifth story is a strange and deeply unsettling one from a guard at a desolate research facility in the middle of the desert. The place was so remote, his only companions were the coyotes that roamed the perimeter fence. The job was extreme isolation, patrolling a complex of low, windowless buildings under a blanket of stars. The weirdness started with the coyotes. At first, their yips and howls were just background noise. But then their behavior changed. They became bolder, gathering near the fence as he made his rounds, their eyes glowing in his flashlight. Their numbers grew from a pair to a pack of 8, and they began to actively stalk him. It was a constant predatory pressure from the darkness. But the animal threat was soon overshadowed by something far stranger. One night, while watching the interior cameras, he saw what he could only describe as a tall man. It was a humanoid figure, far too tall and thin, with unnaturally long arms and a face obscured by what looked like a curtain of dark hair. He watched on screen as this impossible figure squeezed itself through a standard-sized doorway in a way that defied physics. He blinked, and it was gone. He radioed it in, but got a vague response. When he later asked the day shift guards, they admitted they knew of the tall man. It was a known thing. Seen so often, it had become a grim, unspoken part of the job. They refused to say more. The climax, however, was the most bizarre and terrifying. It was a dark, moonless night. His radio had gone dead. The coyote pack was silent, which was even more unnerving. He was doing A patrol inside a large open-plan office. He had that sick feeling of being watched, but this time it felt close. He rounded a corner and his flashlight beam landed on a figure crouched between two cubicles. His first thought was intruder. He raised his flashlight, his hand reaching for his sidearm. It wasn't an intruder, it was a clown statue. It was life-sized, with a grotesque, laughing face painted in garish colors. In one white-gloved hand, it held a small, pathetic-looking Christmas tree, like the one from Charlie Brown. It was so absurd he almost laughed, but the laughter died in his throat. Where did it come from? How did it get here? As he stared, frozen, he swore he could hear a faint, tinkling laugh coming from the statue itself. He backed away slowly, his mind screaming. He ran back to the security office and barricaded the door, spending the rest of the night in pure terror. When the sun finally rose, he went back with two other guards. The clown statue was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. He quit that day. He doesn't know what was real and what wasn't, but he knows that, in the isolation of the desert, the walls between our world and the world of nightmares can become terrifyingly thin. Old buildings collect stories, and old schools, they seem to collect spirits. Our next story comes from a team of guards who discovered they weren't the only ones walking the halls of a historic high school after dark. Story 6, The Students Who Never Left. This story comes from a man who took a part-time weekend security job at an old, historic high school. It was an easy gig, he thought. The job just required 2 guards to be on duty to deter vandalism. The school was a beautiful, Gothic-style building with long, echoing corridors and decades of history soaked into its walls. He was paired with a veteran guard named Marcus, a quiet man who seemed to know every creak and groan of the old building. The new guard quickly noticed that Marcus had strange rules. They were never to go into the old gym after midnight, and if they heard noises from the third-floor science labs, they were to ignore them. When asked why, Marcus would just shake his head and say, "You're better off not knowing. Just do your patrol and don't pay attention to the night students." The new guard thought he was being hazed. Night student deaths had to be a joke. But he soon learned it wasn't. One Saturday night, they were walking down the main second-floor hallway. It was completely silent, the only light casting a red glow from the emergency exit signs. As they rounded a corner, they both saw him. A young man was walking down the hallway ahead of them, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned school uniform. He was walking away from them at a steady pace. The new guard was about to call out, but Marcus put a hand on his arm. "Just watch," Marcus whispered. They stood there and watched as the young man continued down the long, empty corridor. He didn't make a sound. He reached the end of the hall, a solid brick wall where an old wing of the school had been sealed off decades ago. Without breaking stride, the man walked directly into the wall and disappeared. He didn't fade. He was just there one moment and gone the next. The new guard's jaw hung open. He looked at Marcus, who just nodded grimly. "Night student," he said. This wasn't a one-time thing. Over the next few months, the guards saw them several times, fleeting glimpses of figures in old-style clothing, darting into classrooms or sitting at desks in darkened rooms. He once heard a faint piano playing in the locked auditorium. According to Marcus, the school was full of them, spirits of former students who had never left. The unspoken rule among the security staff was to simply ignore them. They weren't malicious, but acknowledging them seemed to encourage more activity. So, the new guard learned the rules. He'd walk the halls, and if he saw a night student, he'd keep his eyes forward and continue on his patrol. A living guardian, sharing the long, dark hours with the unquiet dead. For our final story, we're going to a place where the dead are supposed to rest, but for one guard, they were anything but quiet. If you have your own story you'd like to share, let us know in the comments. We read every single one. Story 7, The Echoes in the Chapel. Our final, most chilling account comes from a guard who gained some online fame as Security 275. His post was a historic colonial-era cemetery in Georgia, a place of crumbling headstones and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. Patrolling a cemetery at night is a job most people would refuse. For him, it was just a quiet, solitary watch over the dead. Or so he thought. His online posts document a series of escalating events. It started small. One night, his flashlight caught a flash of movement near a row of old mausoleums. It looked like a small child darting behind a tombstone. He swept his light back, but there was nothing there. He called out, thinking it was a lost kid. Silence. He searched for 20 minutes, but found no one. He tried to dismiss it. A few weeks later, the sounds began. While patrolling the oldest section, he heard a woman scream. It wasn't distant. It was a raw, terrified scream that erupted right next to him. His training kicked in. He drew his weapon, heart pounding, and scanned the darkness. Nothing. The sound was gone. He sprinted back to his vehicle, his professionalism shattered by pure, primal fear. He wasn't the only one. He shared a story where a coworker covering his shift radioed him in a panic. The other guard reported seeing a little girl in a white dress standing in the hallway of the locked, empty administrative building. When he called out to her, she vanished. But the most compelling part of his story involves the cemetery's old stone chapel. After reports of strange lights, local police were called to do a walkthrough with him. According to his account, one of the officers was wearing a body camera. They found the chapel secure, but as they stood outside, the lights inside began to flicker on and off. This was impossible, as the main power was off at the breaker. The story goes that when the body cam footage was reviewed, it was even more disturbing. As the officers stood outside the locked doors, the camera's mic picked up what sounded like voices from within the empty chapel. Security 275's posts often included pictures of his trained security dog growling at empty spaces or refusing to enter certain areas. For him, this was proof he wasn't just imagining things. Whether it was the spirit of a child, a woman reliving her final moments, or something intelligent playing games in the chapel, the cemetery was not the peaceful resting place it appeared to be. It was active, it was aware, and for the lone guard watching over it, it was a place of unending dread. The night shift ends when the sun rises, but for these guards, the darkness lingers. In the quiet moments of their lives, they might still hear the faint echo of ghostly laughter, the squeak of a phantom tricycle, or a scream that came from nowhere. Their experiences are a chilling reminder that some places never truly sleep, and that the most terrifying job in the world might just be watching over an empty room. Thank you for watching. If these stories send a chill down your spine, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life horror. And if you've ever worked the night shift and seen something you can't explain, share your story in the comments. You never know. It might be in a future video. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what you listen for in the dark.